Wes Anderson's favorite films aren't what you'd expect. A gangster comedy lost for 20 years. An indie drama that Kubrick called one of the best American films ever made. And a romantic comedy Nicolas Cage tried to quit. This list has Cannes hits, forgotten gems, and films Scorsese called ahead of their time. I promise you'll walk away with at least 5 movies you've never heard of. This one was shot in 1969, forgotten for 20 years, and then somehow came back from the dead in 1989. It's about Harry Plotnick, a low-level Jewish gangster who gets out of prison and finds the neighborhood he used to run has completely changed. He's trying to pick up where he left off, but nothing's quite the same anymore. It's part crime story, part awkward social comedy, and definitely not what studios were looking for back in the day. Director Michael Romer just couldn't get anyone to distribute it. People said it was too offbeat, didn't fit the market, whatever. So he shelved it. 2 decades later, he shows it to a friend, gets convinced to submit it to festivals, and suddenly it premieres at Telluride. Critics loved it. Even Martin Scorsese called it a film completely ahead of its time. By that point, most of the cast had left acting altogether. And yeah, it cost a fortune to re-edit and restore, somewhere around $15 million, just to get it back in shape. Not exactly what you'd expect for a low-budget indie from the 60s. Wes Anderson called it very well written, and said it reminded him of The Sopranos, except without the violence. Said it has a certain gentleness about it. This one's special. It's basically director Paul Mazursky's own life story. A young Jewish actor moves out of his parents' place in Brooklyn, heads down to Greenwich Village, and tries to make it big in the acting scene there in the early 50s. Mazursky shot the whole thing exactly where he used to live. They actually filmed inside a real apartment building, and neighbors were super annoyed with noise and people running generators at all hours. Pretty authentic way to recreate your own past, I guess. Wes Anderson loves Mazursky's stuff. He saw it years ago, says he doesn't remember everything, but he remembers loving it. Called Mazursky a great writer-director, and just one of those classic New York filmmakers. You got some pretty big actors here before they were big. Christopher Walken, Jeff Goldblum, and even Bill Murray's first ever movie role. He's basically just an uncredited extra in a crowd scene. Obviously, Murray went on to work a ton with Wes Anderson later on, probably more than any other actor. Mazursky wouldn't let the studio cut anything from the movie. They kept pushing him to trim it down by about 20 minutes. He refused, said this was his most personal film. Didn't matter, it still bombed when it came out. Here's another one Wes Anderson keeps coming back to. Mia Farrow plays Rosemary, moves into a New York apartment with her husband, and things start getting weird fast. When she gets pregnant, she slowly realizes all those creepy suspicions are actually true. It's like the ultimate paranoid horror movie. Paramount almost shut the whole thing down halfway through. They freaked out over all the satanic stuff in the script. Director Roman Polanski almost got fired, but he had final say, so they couldn't touch him. He insisted on Mia Farrow, even though her husband Frank Sinatra hated the idea. Sinatra actually handed her divorce papers right on set because she refused to quit filming. The movie turned into a huge hit and basically started Hollywood's whole satanic panic era. It got Ruth Gordon a Best Supporting Actress Oscar, but weirdly Polanski himself wasn't even nominated for Best Director. And later, the apartment building they filmed at, the Dakota, became infamous as the place where John Lennon was killed. Wes Anderson calls this one of his biggest influences, says he keeps returning to it again and again. He specifically talked about Mia Farrow's great big performance and how good the script is. Clearly, it's a big deal for him because he mentions it all the time. You've got Jack Nicholson and Otis Young playing 2 Navy guys who have one simple job: get a younger sailor, played by Randy Quaid, to military prison. He's got 8 years ahead of him, so they decide we might as well show this kid a good time first. At first glance, it's a road trip movie. Just these 3 guys trying to find some trouble to get into on the way. But there's something else going on under the surface here. It's funny, sure, but it's also pretty sad. These guys are desperate to break out of their normal routine, even for just a couple days, and they get so close to something like freedom you can feel it, but reality always shows up to ruin it. The script, by Robert Towne, actually got held up for 2 years because the studio thought it had way too much swearing. But by the time they finally shot it, people didn't care as much, so all the profanity stayed in. Back then, saying the F word 65 times was a record. Towne basically said, look, these guys can't do anything to help this kid. They have no power, so they just swear because that's all they've got. Little behind-the-scenes thing here. Jack Nicholson turned down Robert Redford's role in The Sting because he thought this one was more his speed, and Towne was his friend. Funny enough, Nicholson and Redford both ended up nominated for Best Actor that year, but they both lost to Jack Lemmon in Save the Tiger. And Wes Anderson loves this one too. When he was about to shoot The Darjeeling Limited, he watched this with Roman Coppola and Jason Schwartzman because they were making another movie about 3 guys traveling together, not totally sure what they're doing. They watched it, got inspired, and basically said, well, we don't really have a plot either, so maybe we're fine. You probably haven't seen this one, but Stanley Kubrick loved it. It's about a young woman trying to figure out her life and make it as a photographer. It was shot on weekends over like 3 years by Claudia Weil, who basically scraped together money however she could. At first, nobody wanted this thing. It was small, quiet, low budget. Studios weren't interested. But then it played festivals and people noticed. Critics went crazy for it. And Kubrick himself saw it and called Claudia Weil one of the best American filmmakers he'd seen in years. He even said Girlfriends was the kind of smart, thoughtful movie you'd normally expect from Europe, not America. It's one of those movies that quietly influenced everything later on. Stuff like Frances Ha, Lady Bird, Girls. But Claudia Weil only got to make one more feature film after this, called It's My Turn. Studio interfered, took it away from her, and after that, she only directed TV. But Kubrick was dead on. This one's really special. Wes Anderson said he first heard about it, reading an old interview with Kubrick, checked it out, and ended up loving it. Jack Lemmon plays a regular guy working at an insurance company. He figures out a quick way to climb the corporate ladder, letting his bosses use his apartment for their affairs. But things get messy when Lemmon falls for the elevator girl, played by Shirley MacLaine, who just happens to be dating Lemmon's boss. Billy Wilder wrote the whole script in 3 weeks, based it off a tiny subplot from Brief Encounter. Back then, openly showing adultery and corporate depression in an American mainstream movie was still pretty new, pretty shocking. And when it came out, it got Oscars for Best Picture, Director, and Screenplay. The Apartment isn't just Wes Anderson's favorite movie. David Lynch loved it too. Anderson just straight up calls it such a good Billy Wilder movie. Can't argue with that. Moonstruck is just one of those great New York movies that gets pretty much everything right. You've got Cher as a widowed Italian-American woman who ends up falling for her fiancé's younger brother, Nicolas Cage playing this angry, intense guy. And the script here is super sharp, the dialogue's spot on, and visually, it's one of the best-looking movies set in New York you'll see. Funny thing is, Cher wasn't even the first choice for the studio. They went after Sally Field and Barbra Streisand first, but both passed. Nicolas Cage didn't even want the part. He thought the whole thing was too mushy, too soft, whatever. But his agent basically guilted him into it, and he's great in it. They shot on location in Brooklyn, Little Italy, with real Italian-Americans from those neighborhoods, and the movie blew up big time at the box office, made over $120 million worldwide on just a $15 million budget. Wes Anderson talks about how much he loves this one. He calls it a very well-done Hollywood take on New York and points out how great the cast is. Cher, Nicolas Cage, Olympia Dukakis, John Mahoney, Vincent Gardenia, all perfect in this movie. This one is an anthology movie, 3 different New York stories directed separately by Scorsese, Coppola, and Woody Allen. They hyped it as a huge deal at the time, but honestly, the only really good part is Scorsese's. Scorsese's segment is called Life Lessons and stars Nick Nolte as a middle-aged painter who's going through a messy, complicated relationship with his younger girlfriend, played by Rosanna Arquette. She was actually dating Scorsese at the time, so that stirred up some tabloid noise. Critics really liked Scorsese's segment at Cannes, but pretty much ripped Coppola's part apart. Variety called Coppola's film a lightweight misfire, while Scorsese's was considered the clear standout. Roger Ebert basically summed it up by saying, one good, one bad, one disappointing. Kind of funny side note, this movie was Adrien Brody's first ever film role, and Brody would later show up in a bunch of Wes Anderson movies. And Wes himself talks about how much he loves the Scorsese segment, particularly Nick Nolte's painter character. He mentions the setting too and praises Richard Price's writing as capturing that classic New York voice. If we're talking classic New York movies, Sweet Smell of Success is pretty much required viewing. Tony Curtis plays a slick, shady press agent, and he gets pulled into a nasty scheme by a powerful newspaper columnist, played by Burt Lancaster, to sabotage his sister's relationship with a jazz musician. Back when they made it, Tony actually had to fight his own studio to do this movie. Universal wanted him as this clean-cut, leading man type and did not want him anywhere near a character this shady. But Curtis pushed for it hard and the movie got made, with Burt Lancaster putting up his own money to produce it himself. Wes Anderson points out that it's just visually iconic, this perfectly stark black and white New York atmosphere, and he specifically calls out Clifford Odets's dialogue as being absolutely brilliant. At the time, critics didn't get it at all. They thought it was way too cynical. It totally bombed, and Lancaster lost money, never produced another movie himself after that. Now, though, people see it completely differently. It's become a cult classic and people consider it one of the best screenplays ever written. Martin Scorsese himself says it's one of the greatest films he's ever seen. This is probably Woody Allen at his best. Three sisters, Hannah, Lee, Holly, get together at Thanksgiving, and pretty quickly things get complicated. Hannah finds out her husband's having an affair with one of her own sisters, and that's just how it starts. It made $40 million on just a $6 million budget, became Woody Allen's biggest hit until Midnight in Paris, won 3 Oscars, Best Screenplay for Allen and Best Supporting Actor and Actress for Michael Caine and Diane Wiest. It's got a ton of familiar faces, Carrie Fisher, Maureen O'Sullivan, and it looks beautiful. Allen kinda borrowed the family get-together structure from Ingmar Bergman's Fanny and Alexander, but it totally works on its own. And of course, Woody himself has maybe the funniest visual gag in the whole thing. Wes Anderson said flat out it's his favorite Woody Allen movie. If you know Anderson, that totally checks out. This one's interesting because critics absolutely hated it. Roger Ebert even called it an embarrassment, but Wes Anderson loves it. Anderson mentioned this one when he was talking to BAFTA about directors who really influenced how he stages and shoots scenes. He mentioned Orson Welles, Martin Scorsese, and Roman Polanski, and one of his favorite Polanski movies is The Tenant. This movie is about a guy, played by Polanski himself, who rents an apartment in a weird, isolated building right after the previous tenant tried to take her own life. Pretty soon, this dude starts getting paranoid, convinced everyone in the building wants him dead. Originally, it was supposed to be made by British director Jack Clayton in the early 70s. Clayton was busy finishing up The Great Gatsby, but he wanted to do The Tenant next. Paramount had bought the project specifically for him, but then Paramount boss Barry Diller randomly decided Clayton probably wasn't interested anymore, didn't even bother checking with him, and just handed it to Polanski. Clayton only found out when it was too late. Roger Ebert hated the result. In his review, he said it's not just bad, it's embarrassing. And the only reason people even watched it was because Polanski's name was on it. Maybe if Clayton had made it instead, Ebert would have liked it. Who knows? But Wes Anderson is all in. He even had his whole cast and crew watch this one before filming The French Dispatch. Tons of filmmakers love A Clockwork Orange. Pretty much everyone except Quentin Tarantino, who thinks Kubrick was kind of a hypocrite. But even Tarantino admits the opening of the movie is perfect, calls the first 20 minutes pretty perfect actually. Wes Anderson's definitely in the love it camp. He calls it Kubrick at his absolute best. According to Anderson, it's incredibly designed, really specific, and manages to build this world you've never seen before. At the same time, he says the movie still feels energetic and spontaneous, not overly controlled. So yeah, Anderson loves this movie. This one's a classic, and it was a big influence on Wes Anderson's Grand Budapest Hotel. It's from director Ernst Lubitsch, made back in the early 30s. Lubitsch was basically king at Paramount back then, and a lot of people say Trouble in Paradise is his best movie. The plot's simple. You've got a super smooth thief and a lady pickpocket, and together they're planning to rip off a rich, beautiful woman who owns a perfume company. It's exactly the kind of stylish, witty, perfectly polished movie Anderson was going for with Grand Budapest. When Anderson talked about it, he said it was an ideal Lubitsch movie. Perfect tone, super light touch, like some kind of fancy dessert. He even said he's not sure anyone today could pull off that same tone. And if you watch Grand Budapest, you can definitely see how much he loved this one. This is an earlier film by Jean Renoir, before he made classics like Grand Illusion or Rules of the Game. It's set in the south of France and follows a group of immigrant laborers living there. Renoir actually cast real locals, not professional actors, and shot the whole thing on location. In the 1930s, that was pretty groundbreaking. Anderson loves this movie too. He calls it lyrical and sad, says it's great and beautiful, but people don't really talk about it anymore. For Renoir, this movie was actually a risk. He'd just had a string of box office failures, even though some of those failures turned into classics later on. But when he got the story for Toni, it clicked. Wes Anderson included this one on his Sight and Sound list of the greatest films ever made. First film ever directed by Mike Nichols, who went on to make The Graduate and Catch-22. Not a bad way to start. It was nominated for 13 Oscars, including one for every single main actor: Elizabeth Taylor, Richard Burton, George Segal, and Sandy Dennis. Didn't win Best Picture. It lost to A Man for All Seasons, but it still made a huge impact. It all takes place in one house, over one long night. Just two couples talking. Well, not talking, ripping each other apart. It's all dialogue, and it's shot in black and white by Haskell Wexler, who won the Oscar for cinematography. He was the last to win in that category before it was discontinued. Anderson didn't love this movie when he first saw it, said it made him feel bad, too negative. But years later, on a rewatch, he completely changed his mind. He called it beautiful, inspired, exciting, one of the strongest directorial debuts ever made. This one came from Henri-Georges Clouzot, and it almost didn't happen. After he made The Raven during the Nazi occupation of France, he got banned from working for a few years. French authorities accused him of making anti-French propaganda. When he finally came back, Louis Jouvet, who starred in this, gave him a shot. The film follows a jealous husband, a nightclub singer, and a murder. It's pure French noir, full of twists, cops, suspects, and paranoia. Jouvet plays an ambiguous inspector unraveling the case. And Anderson put this on his 2022 Sight and Sound ballot, clearly still a favorite. Clouzot adapted the story from a crime novel that was out of print by the time he started writing, so he did it from memory. He'd read it 5 years earlier and just rewrote the entire plot from what he remembered. The original author was furious when he saw it. Still, the final product became one of Clouzot's most praised films. The Man Who Loved Women is a black comedy from 1977, and Anderson included it on his Sight and Sound list too. It's one of Truffaut's funnier movies, definitely more shoot the piano player than the 400 blows. The whole thing is told at the funeral of a man named Bertrand Morand. One by one, his ex-lovers show up and start telling stories. Turns out, he was a serial womanizer, a guy who couldn't settle down, didn't want to settle down, and kept souvenirs from every affair. Letters, photos, all tucked away in drawers. He starts writing a book about all of it. Then he dies. The main character looks at women from the legs up, makes no apologies for it, and the film doesn't either. It would never get made today. Not like this, but Truffaut handled it with a weird kind of honesty. Here's the only Godard film Anderson put on his all-French ballot in 2022, and it's a standout all right. His portrait of a woman drifting into sex work is told in 12 episodes, and it's cold, but weirdly beautiful. Anna Karina plays Nana, a woman who walks away from her family to chase an acting career, only to end up broke and pulled into prostitution. It's not sentimental, it's more documentary-like. It just happens, and then it ends. It's mostly forgotten now, but at the time it was everywhere. Susan Sontag once called it one of the most extraordinary, beautiful, and original works of art she'd ever seen. Roger Ebert agreed. It was one of his favorites too. Anderson clearly has a soft spot for this one. It's Godard at his most precise. Minimal dialogue, stripped visuals, broken structure. Everything Anderson later built into his own style, you can see the seeds of it here. This was the first time Akira Kurosawa and Toshiro Mifune worked together, first of 16 collaborations. Kurosawa co-wrote and directed it right after the war, and even though it's a Japanese film, it fits perfectly into the noir genre. It's set in Tokyo during the American occupation, when all the post-war reforms were being introduced. Mifune plays a tubercular gangster. Takashi Shimura plays the alcoholic doctor trying to save him. It's all set in a neighborhood that's basically falling apart. Kurosawa's usual moral clarity isn't as front and center here. This one's more of a character-driven mess, in a good way. Wes Anderson's a huge Kurosawa fan. No surprise there. And Drunken Angel made the cut when he personally curated a Kurosawa series at New York's Metrograph Theater. During the intro for Isle of Dogs, he called Kurosawa a cinematic sensei to generations of directors and said he was just grateful to screen some of his work in 35mm. Also in that Metrograph lineup was Stray Dog, Kurosawa's early detective drama. Mifune's back, this time as a young cop who loses his pistol on a crowded bus. That stolen gun gets used in a murder, and the whole movie becomes a long manhunt to track it down. It's basically a procedural before procedural TV existed. It's now considered a key precursor to the modern detective genre. Critics love it. Wes Anderson loves it. But funnily enough, Kurosawa himself didn't. He called it too technical and said it had all that technique and not one real thought in it. Wes Anderson has mentioned this one more than once. The 400 Blows is one of those films that shows up on just about every director's list of essentials. Martin Scorsese included it on his 39 essential foreign films for a young filmmaker. Anderson said it was one of the first films that made him think about becoming a director in the first place. Directed by François Truffaut, it follows a kid in Paris who keeps getting into trouble, at home, at school, and eventually with the law. What stands out is the mix of casual day-to-day detail and the serious gut punch at the end. It's a film that doesn't oversell anything, which is probably why Anderson respects it. When asked about influences behind the Grand Budapest Hotel at a New York Public Library event in 2015, he brought this one up immediately. Anderson's been very clear about how much Miyazaki's films mean to him, My Neighbor Totoro especially. He talked about it at the Berlin Film Festival while promoting Isle of Dogs, and later told Vanity Fair that Totoro was one of the biggest inspirations for that film. When it came out, Totoro didn't do well financially. It only broke even after 2 years, mainly because Totoro plush toys started selling. Now it's one of the most famous Japanese animated films of all time, but it didn't start that way. Anderson once summed it up like this: there's a giant monster and a number of sprites, but 2/3 of the movie is spent cleaning the house, wandering the property, getting to know the neighbors, taking a bath, and there's a lot of nature. There's a different kind of rhythm and emphasis than you'd find in American movies.